So, again, as I said to anyone who's been in from the start, or I'll just repeat for anyone who's just joined, my name is Chris Wilson, the E-Services Librarian. Thank you for everyone who's turned up so far to the event, and we are very, very happy to have Julie Hamill here for our online event today. Julie is a writer, which most of you probably will know, and hope that, which is the reason why we've got an event with her today. And she has written 3 fantastic books, one of which is just about to come out tomorrow, and which is June, which is the final part of a trilogy that she's been writing. She's also known for her broadcasting skills as well. She has previously been doing radio and things like that sort of stuff as well. So, Julie, thank you for coming along to our online event today. So it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, it's great to have a good kind of little audience come along this and join us for an online event, which is kind of quite a new thing for us. We haven't done very many online events, but it's good to have a nice wee crowd to come along. And so, I say, Julie, we're very excited to have you here today for our online event on the lead up to your book coming out tomorrow, which is called June, and it is the final part of your current series. It was the kind of final chapter of it, if you like, and it must be quite exciting to kind of get that final chapter out there for everyone to be able to read.
It is really exciting. I mean, I hope that everybody's going to be satisfied with the conclusion. You know, I always am anxious to hear the reviews, because people are really invested in these characters, and they have, you know, ideas about what they should be doing, and you know, they seem to have become like quite connected with each one. So I just hope that it's a satisfactory conclusion for people. I wait the reviews.
I'm sure they'll all love it, and it'll be a nice ending to the story. The series, of course, that's part of is the Life and Soul series, and the first 2 books are Frank and Jackie. I read Frank recently, and I thought it was quite a kind of beautiful story. The character Frank, I imagine, is particularly relatable for a lot of people. He's quite a stereotypical older dad character, isn't he? And did you base him on anyone in particular?
Well, I mean, I think there's a very sort of typical North Lanarkshire style of dad. I see it in my own dad. I see it in my friends' dads, Jacqueline's dad and Barbara's dad and Gillian's dad. I could see it, and that they are pretty central to the family, but they probably think of themselves as sort of somewhat unremarkable and insignificant. But in fact, they are deeply loved and deeply valued by everyone around them. So they do have their own certain little quirks or certain little habits. So you know, taking their 40 winks, or sitting and, you know, watching the same TV program, or sitting in a particular chair. They're probably from a generation that didn't really cook. I'm not saying they can't cook. I know my dad can definitely cook, but back then it was a time where in the 80s where, you know, women were cooking for men. So Frank sort of typifies that kind of person, but also he's a character in his own right as well, sort of. So whilst I drew inspiration from what I knew, I also pushed him away from what I knew as well. I made him a widower because he felt like a very solitary character, and I wanted to bring some sympathy his way. So I kind of made him, initially at the beginning of the book, at the beginning of Frank, he's quite sort of, he's not useless, but he's you know, you feel for him a little bit, because he's kind of a bit lost without his wife who has died, and he's grieving and he's vulnerable to a certain extent. So I sort of painted in that way to draw the reader in and feel some, you know, empathy and sympathy for the character.
Yeah, I think I felt like a bit like he quite relatable as a person. I kind of saw parts of him in my dad a little bit as well, and there's certain parts in the story that I kind of felt as if like I could kind of see my dad doing similar things, like when he's making the cut up and things like that. He's throwing bits of the box about and things. I could kind of see my dad doing things similar to that in real life. That I'm pretty sure a lot of people will kind of be able to connect to him as a character as well.
Yeah, there's a Scottish humour in it as well. There's a Scottish humour and a lot of mischievousness in the character, very much like my own dad, who's sitting here watching right now. So I have to be careful what I'm saying.
Makes it a little bit more challenging to say things.
I know. I'm trying to walk the line here.
Hello, Mr. Hamill.
I think he's probably not got his hearing aid in. He said, look at him. Rosanna will be like, they're talking about you.
Now, when I did read Frank, I discovered it had quite an interesting beginning of life, doesn't it? It wasn't actually intended as a book originally, is that right?
Yeah, it started like life as a play, actually. I had a previous career. I worked in advertising for a long time, but different big agencies, and then I had children and decided to change career. So I went back to uni, to the Open University, and I always enjoyed writing. Even as far back at school, I would write stories. I really loved writing stories. And I went back to the OU and I did really well. I graduated at age 40, which seems like a lifetime ago. And they awarded me what's called a double first, which was like a really good mark. And so the tutor sort of said, look, don't waste this. You should write. You need to write. You can write. And I had developed began to develop the character Frank as part of the OU degree, and had written a play, a 15-minute play called The End of the Bench, where which I drew inspiration from walking my children in the park. I used to walk past 4 people that would sit on a bench. They were clearly retired. It was 3 men, 1 woman. One of the men was deaf. One was doing all the chatting along with the woman, and the other 2 were kind of just sitting there because they had nothing else to do, really. And every day I walked past them, I heard more and more of their conversations and more of, I just thought, they are sitting there talking about literally nothing, but it is really, really entertaining. So I walked past one day and they were talking about, one of them was talking about I can't remember, it was like a bird that caught a rabbit. It was quite a complicated. So a cat had caught a pigeon in its mouth, and I went round the circle to push the pram to get the baby asleep several times, and every time I went around, they were still talking about the size of this pigeon that was in the cat's mouth and how the cat probably shouldn't have been able to pick it up because the pigeon was too heavy. And another day I went around and they were talking about a carrier bag that was stuck in a tree. And how are they ever going to get that carrier bag out of that tree? It's a disgrace, and the council should send somebody round with a ladder to take that carrier bag out of the tree. And this went on and on. So I put Frank, the character Frank, into that bench with those 4 people. And what happens in the play is he falls asleep. He has a nap on the bench, but in his dream he dies, and that's why it's called The End of the Bench. And he's met by the Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper comes along, and that's sort of where the comedy starts, and the sort of playing with the idea of death. What can I do with death? And the comedy is, the Grim Reaper is like, come on, it's you. Your time's up. And he goes, wait a minute. Can you not take her? She's a nightmare. She never shuts up. She should go before me. And I started kind of laughing, thinking this is a bit wrong, but it's a bit right. And the Grim Reaper became like a sort of a camp game show host, and it turned into a bit of a comedy. And then at the end of the play, he wakes up. He doesn't know if he's dead or alive, and he quickly gets out. He gets his stick and he gets out of there. Sort of thing, and it ends. And you're left wondering, well, what actually, you have to sort of, as the reader, has to make their mind up, like, did he die, or is he, what's happening there? So those kind of 2 things is sort of what I call the beautiful mundane, and that the everyday conversations that seem insignificant that people have, which is the life element of the books, and then the other element is the soul. What relationship do we have with loved ones who have died, passed away, who in grief we try to keep them close, because it's an easier way of letting go. If you hold on to them and have a conversation with them in your head, then it gives you a little bit of comfort, and not necessarily let go. You never let go, but it's holding on is easier in that way.
And I think that is something that is kind of that sort of beautiful mundane thing that you're talking about. It's something that definitely comes across in the sort of in the language of the books and the kind of concept of the book, things like that sort of stuff as well. I think will we do a little bit of reading from one of the books just now? If you want, is that all right?
Yeah. Do you want? Has everybody read Frank and Jackie? Because I don't want to do any spoilers if people haven't read the book, so Sarah's got
Yeah.
it. Stephen, you've read them, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stephen put on the chat that he's read that as well. Do you want to go? Will we go with the new book? Is there a bit in one of the new books that you
can do? Yeah.
You want to read?
Yeah.
Well, we'll go with that. I think as like a sneak preview of what's coming out for tomorrow. I think that maybe kind of be a nice little kind of part.
So I'll take a bit from the first chapter. It's not the very beginning first chapter, it's the second part of the first chapter. And there's a character, I don't know if everyone remembers, called Father Cleary, who's a sort of fairly big priest who is a good friend of Frank's. And he, in the previous books, sort of thought at one point he saw June on the late deceased June on Frank's couch, and he also, when him and Frank had a heart-to-heart, he had said that his granny has visited him. So, but he's a big character. He's kind of into, surprisingly, has a lot of surprising things about his character, that he's kind of into pop music, which I just thought was a brilliant juxtaposition for a big priest to just love the charts. And I just
Sarah and one of the guests has also put in the chat with the toenails, which I think is we don't want to go too far into the toenails. I don't think.
I don't know. That's my nephew's favourite part of the first book. I don't know what. Anyway, I don't know. Sorry about that, but so Father Cleary is in his study, and in this book, June, it's called June because it's obviously the third generation, so it's the granddaughter. So she has a central thread, a central storyline, but also the previous June also has a central storyline as well. So it connects the kind of two, and Frank is sort of at the centre of it. Father Cleary takes a larger role in this book because, well, you'll see why in a second, and that has a knock-on effect, which sort of creates the narrative that you follow in June. So this is from June, which is out tomorrow. Father Cleary reclined in his office chair and flicked through stapled papers in a manila folder marked Communion. He found it on his desk after Mrs. Clark, the housekeeper, had been in to make his dinner. Never seen the half of these characters at Mass, he said to himself, placing each application into one pile or another. I've never seen them. Nope. Wait a minute now. That name rings a bell. Did her sister not make a communion last year? That's right. His father is a plate monitor. That address is out of catchment. There's no baptism certificate. He placed the small bookmaker pen behind his ear as he leaned forward to look further into the application details. Pearson. His father works for the... He reached for the top of his left arm and rubbed it as if he was cold. Mrs. Clark, he called. Mrs. He looked at the clock and wondered if she had left yet. He saw the coffee, then remembered she had left a while ago after she brought him a cup. He noticed she had left her reading glasses and moved them to the front corner of the desk. Well, we're going to have more than 30. He rubbed his jaw vigorously. Ah, well, what's another potato in the pot, as my old granny used to say. Ah, where's your heart, Pugsy? Sure we can squeeze a wee one on the end, he smiled, thinking of his granny, then stamped approved on every application and put them back in the folder. He noticed that some of the applications had already been stamped and assumed that one of the Severian fathers had been in, helping out again. That's 10 across 2 rows and 11 on another row. Parents and families will fill the rest of the church. Now, where's my calendar? Ah, here we are. August. He looked at the month, then looked puzzled. I thought is it not April? He looked back at the folder, then back at the calendar. 6! He threw the pen down. This blasted indigestion. He opened his top drawer and took out a tube of Rennies. God, please forgive me for the swearing, but it's bloody sore. He popped 2 tablets out of the foil and crunched them. He opened his middle drawer, shifted between different coloured packets of biscuits and closed it again. Moving slowly, he slid the bottom drawer open and removed a bottle of Bell's whiskey that a parishioner had given him. He looked inside the 2 coffee mugs on his desk and poured the remnants of one into another, before pouring a large measure of whiskey into the empty coffee cup, filling it over halfway. He swallowed the last Rennie crumbs down with a burning swig. Cold coffee flavour whiskey, now there's a thing. I'd be a millionaire if I wasn't a priest. He stood up and lifted a log and threw it into the open fire. Bright orange sparks flew up from the wood as he pushed it into position with a metal poker. He stabbed into the log to make the fire crackle and catch, and then put the fire guard back across the front. He walked back to his desk. He touched his forehead and felt a light sweat. Mrs. Clark, he wheezed. Oh, he clutched his chest and dropped to the floor. He edged forward on his knees to the desk and pulled out the curly phone wire. The receiver thudded down just as he did. He could hear the dial tone, but he couldn't make the call. He stared at the phone and lay there like a beached whale, inches from sea. He rolled his head over to the other side. Hovering beside him were the figures of various parishioners he had said a funeral mass for over the years. He recognised the faces of old Mary, Mrs. McGuinness, John Barry, and June McNeil, his friend Frank McNeil's late wife, who all stood staring. His eyes moved from left to right and back again across their faces. He shut his eyes, held his chest, and filled his mind with a decade of the Rosary.
Ooh, fantastic. That's a nice little sneak preview of what's to come for the rest of the book there. That was getting nice. Thank you for sharing that, Julie, and hopefully everyone who has read up to that point will be able to kind of catch up with the new book once it comes out tomorrow. That's just fantastic. Now, the time periods in the books for me are one of the really quite interesting parts of this for it. Is the first book set in 1985, and this latest one I think is 1993, around about then. It's a time for most of the readers, and in particular any readers in the kind of local area of Airdrie where it's set, will really be able to visualise the lots of the scenes and landmarks and stuff in the book, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of Airdrie locations in there. It's it wasn't my intention to set it in Airdrie initially. I was trying to think of a made up place in Scotland. It was just a typical working class town, and I started sort of play. But Airdrie had a profound effect on me, as I think anywhere that when you live anywhere in your teenage years, any music you listen to in your teenage years is with you sort of for the rest of your life. Any books that you read, something about your teenage years, your formative years, where you start to kind of make all your opinions. And I spent a lot of time, there was nothing to do really. I spent a lot of time walking around Airdrie with headphones on. And, obviously there was no phones then, there was no internet then. And so I was constantly listening to music, walking around the streets of Airdrie, because actually the thing to do was to go up the street. That was the thing. That was the activity, to go up the street. So if I wasn't meeting my friends, I finished my paper round, I collect, the paper money, take it up to the Halifax. And I vividly remember the walks, that I walk up under the rail bridge, up Broomnall Street, would turn right onto, nip into the Halifax, and then would drop, go into W.H. Smith's, would go into John Menzies, big trip to Woolworths, which would take at least 25 minutes, enjoying and lifting up records and turning them over and reading the back and reading the lyrics and reading who the producer was and everything, and then continuing along that street to smell the chip shop smell coming out of Antonia's, and going up to Top Cross and going past Orr's, which was the posh shop, going up to Zambonini's, where I would get a pineapple fritter or a banana fritter for 22 pence, and then also going to places like the Baths, going to places like Zambonini's, and also the place that my friends and I, Babs, who I see is on the call, we would go to the shows at Chapel Street, because our friend Jacqueline lived up on Chapel Street. And the beginning of the book Jackie, there's a whole chapter on the shows, which is really brings in the music of the time and allows the reader to kind of position themselves as exactly where they were, and all the different rides and the sounds and the smells and the sights that you get a good flavour of Airdrie. And in fact, somebody just wrote a review on Amazon who had finished Frank and was starting Jackie, saying that the Airdrie Tourist Board she needs to get in touch with the Airdrie Tourist Board, and there needs to be a kind of a tour of the Clean One and the Spud Spot and the all these different places in the library to kind of to lift Airdrie a little bit. So, but I know that Airdrie's changed a lot over the years, but as I say, initially it wasn't my intention to put it there. In fact, I took the letters from Airdrie and tried to turn it into another town, and ended up with Ridley, which is not helpful.
No.
So yeah, it's a special place, still a place that I'm really fond of. But my parents don't live there anymore. They moved to God's country in the Wiflet and Coatbridge.
Oh, see that's the thing. But I'm not even sure if Airdrie would have a tourist board, to be honest, to try
Yeah.
and kind of make it a tourist attraction, to be honest. But there you go. Maybe one book sale at a time will maybe kind of put Airdrie on the map a little bit and get somewhere to kind of come and visit and as a Julie Hamill Life and Soul tour. Which is such a fantastic thing to get up and running if we could get that happening in the town. But I did kind of wonder about whether, because you did grow up in Airdrie, didn't you? Whether that would have been a kind of the obvious, why it was an obvious choice to kind of pick it. But obviously, you're saying it wasn't kind of the case. But it's interesting to kind of, I guess, kind of having that kind of life experience here kind of makes the places a bit more sort of real whenever you're kind of reading them, because you can properly kind of really visualize, like you say, kind of walking around these places and visiting these places, and rather than kind of a sort of made up place where you it's maybe kind of you can't connect to it quite as much.
I think that's exactly the right point. You know, when I see Father Cleary going up to Antonia's, I know what he's going to order. When I see Frank taking June into Shirelles as he does in the next book, I know exactly what the booths look like. I know exactly what's on the menu. When people go to Christie's, I know that the domino cake is going to be in the window. I know that strawberry tarts are going to feature, you know, from DL's. My dad worked for DL, so I was up close and personal with a lot of those cakes. So, you know, I remember. I remember
that must have been a difficult thing to have to do.
I had a very tough upbringing, Chris. I remember like going to Libraries as well and getting a roll and chips, and I remember the roll would be absolutely sodden with vinegar, and how much we loved it. We would come down Central Park from school every day from St Margaret's, go to Libraries, get a roll and chips, and go to Christie's and get a cream ring with coconut. It was the most unhealthy diet ever, but that's, you know, that was the event. The event was going up the street, going for food, looking at records, books, you know, toys, and pick and mix and things like that. And that's what we did.
Yeah, and that's something that this current generation probably misses out a little bit on. They won't have that experience of going along to, or very, very rarely get the opportunity to go along to kind of a record shop or somewhere kind of like say Woolworths or whatever that's got those CDs and stuff. But we recorded a podcast which will go out on Thursday this week that we got a little bit sidetracked talking about like the kind of how important the covers are for artwork and CDs and cassettes and stuff like that in the past. So what the kind of current generation probably doesn't really get as much.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I don't think they feel that they're missing out because, you know, I see my son and my daughter and how they consume music, and I do feel a bit nostalgic and sad for the times gone by. I think you will never actually have that visceral experience of what it's like to pick up an album, roll it over and, you know, really feel it and put the needle on the record, and you won't have that. But they don't know what they've never had, so it doesn't. True. They are in an area of streaming, and that industry has changed so much, and the literary industry has changed almost. It's unrecognizable now. When I was talking to my new friend Ian Rankin about it the other night, he was saying, "Oh, it's totally changed now."
Okay. Just dropping in the names there. That was very well done there. So yeah, of course. But you did meet Ian Rankin recently, and he had recently kind of read your books and stuff. What was the kind of feedback on this? What did he think of them?
I mean, I am flabbergasted sort of by the support that I've had from the likes of Jimmy McGovern, Ian Rankin, David Quantick, who are all writers that I really admire, both in television and in fiction and non-fiction. Ian Rankin, I mean, multi-million best-selling author, Ian Rankin, just, rebus, I mean, unbelievable. And he does a lot for writers that are nowhere near for the mice writers that are nowhere near as famous as he is. And so he allows writers to send the books, writers and musicians to send albums, and he will listen to them. And what he usually does is he'll get a pile of books and he'll go, "Here's today's delivery," and tweet that, and then you'll never hear from it again. But that's enough. that recognition is enough for you to go, wow, Ian Rankin's got my book. You might not read it, but at least he went to the trouble of taking a photo of it and tweeting it, which means, you know, 2 other people might buy it or whatever.
Yeah.
I never expected him to come back and say that he'd read it, and I didn't even know. And in fact, it was the same day that I was in the Airdrie and Coatbridge Advertiser that my dad had sent me to say how proud he was that I'd finally made page 3.
I did see you pointed that out online, and I did have a chuckle at that. There's not many dads, I think, that would be too proud of that, but there you go.
and so the same day, this guy from Edinburgh, Barbara will remember him, Andrew Ritchie, who I haven't heard from for years, not for years and years, 20, 30 years. And he then tweets, says, did you see this? And it's a picture of Ian Rankin with Frank on the cover saying, just finished this, you know, can't remember what it was he said, but he said, like, it's an understated gem. And he got it. He said, just finished this 1980s working class Scotland novel. It's an understated gem, and this and this and this. He said loads of really lovely things about it. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, he bothered to read. He read it. And then he wrote, now on to the follow-up. So then he was like, oh, I've just arrived in London, blah, blah, blah. I took the sleeper train. That's when I started stalking him. I didn't. I was already following him. And then so I thought, well, I'll go and quickly get a ticket to go and see him. So then he did this amazing talk about his new book and huge stage and fancy lights and amazing theatre. It was wonderful. And I was comparing that to what I'm about to do at the Dublin Castle. But anyway, it was funny. And so then I sort of went to meet him afterwards, and he's very, very dry, like really kind of like, he doesn't really smile, but he cracks loads of jokes out the side of his mouth kind of thing. So he's really hilarious. And so I went up to meet him and I said, I'm Julie Hamill. And that's all I said. And he went, oh, I've got your book with me. I was reading your book coming down on the sleeper train. It's the only book I've got with me. I grabbed it before I left, and I was reading it, you know, and I was like, really excited. And he said, and he goes, but that baddie, like that. I thought, what is he talking about, that bad? And I went, oh, Tommy. And he went, I hate him. I said, oh, how good. And he said, I almost shut the book when I saw he was back. I couldn't believe you brought him back. I hate him. And I was like, oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Ian Rankin. And then, so he said, I'm really, really enjoying it. And of course, immediately just, you know, I'm in the presence of greatness and I'm like, do you think it's good enough? Is it good enough? And he's like, of course it's good enough. It's really good. He said, no one else is doing what you're doing right now. No one else is taking that, the understatedness of that writing, that fiction, and putting it down into something beautiful. He said, you're definitely good enough, and stop having your imposter syndrome, even though he had just admitted on stage that he also has imposter syndrome. So, well,
if Ian Rankin can have it, then anyone can have it, let's face it.
Exactly, yeah.
Let's kind of touch a little bit on the baddie a little bit as well. So I mean, Jackie is the daughter of Frank and June, and in the books, and she gets involved in what I was going to describe as a not so nice guy, and that is Tommy in the books. But she gets in a difficult situation with him, but actually I felt that point in the story, it was actually kind of a bit of a major turning point for everyone in the story, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it has a knock-on effect, and I'm assuming everybody's read Frank, so everybody knows. Is there anybody who hasn't read Frank? Because I don't want to give you a big spoiler. So
if you haven't read it, let us know in the chat just now, so we can kind of censor the answer a little bit.
Plug your ears. So when Jackie gets pregnant to the local bad boy Tommy, and then she goes on to have a baby, it is, as you say, a turning point for everyone around her, particularly her dad, Frank, because he has to go back to work at the hospital and he has to look after the baby, which is you know, it's not, he hasn't done for a long time, but it changes things for him in a sort of circle of life way. And whilst he's still grieving June, he has this new little treasure, in fact, to talk to June about, you know, who is just to confuse things, been named after her granny. So she's called June as well. So they often call her like Junie or June, you know, to try and sort of distinguish between the two. Yeah, so it changes things certainly for Frank in his story. And then when we come on to the Jackie book and the baby's a little bit older, we see how the pace between the two books, the reader pace changes, because you have that sort of tone of voice for Frank, which is slower, more comforting, more sort of depth into things like the cup rings on the side of the chair. Whereas Jackie's pace is a bit more buzzing. You know, she's going up the street, she's got shopping to do, she's got to pick up this, pick up that, she's got to drop her, you know, June off here, pick her up from there, get to work. Yeah. So the book sort of changes pace again. And in the third book now, the tone is more reflective of all the characters. So although it is a book named June, it actually is a multi-point of view threads for every single character that has been in the previous two books. And so when you're reading about Frank with his granddaughter, you're getting a slower tone and a more mischievous and fun kind of tone in their exchange, because they have a lovely relationship. But when you're reading about, say, Jackie, changes again to more sort of darting about. And then you're reading about Tommy, you've got all the sort of more sinister atmosphere around him, you know, where he's all the baddies have always got cigarettes. No offense to anybody that smokes, but the way he smokes and the way he flicks the cigarette, like almost like he's flicking your face, you know, and it lands in the puddle. He likes it to land in a puddle because he likes the hiss sound, you know. So around him is more kind of that changes. And then, you know, Jean-Paul, who's another character that's in the Jackie book, he comes back again. And obviously his uncle, as you've just heard, his uncle is the priest, Father Cleary. He's not very well. So that changes things for him and has a knock-on effect for that family. And his kind of, Jean-Paul goes into a kind of a different sort of point of view as well, and a different situation for him. So it's everyone, including Tommy and Viv and Terry and Viv's mum and dad and all those kind of supporting characters. Mrs. Morrison, who's everybody's favourite, she's back as well. She has a bigger role as well. So they're all in there again.
Fantastic. And when I was reading the book, I noticed, whenever I was looking into some questions and stuff for you, I noticed that your middle name was Patricia, which has got a significant moment in the first book as a name. Was that a kind of little bit of an ode to whoever it is that you got that middle name after?
Yeah, it's my mum, who I don't know if she's watching, or she's hiding off camera probably. Yeah, but she her name is Patricia, or Pat as she's known as, and I just thought it'd be a nice thing to kind of pop her name in there just to make sure, because the truth is that the covers of the books are all old family photos. So this
really
so this cover is actually, you see that handsome man there is on the screen. That's my dad, and my doppelganger Roseanne, my sister, is also on the screen there. So that's these two on a bench with my other sister, who I believe was sitting here, but she's been cropped. and she's like Louise, and she's like, am I in this next book? I better be in this next book. And of course, as soon as you write anything, that's sort of, everybody in your family's like, am I in it? Am I in it? And they're sort of scanning the pages. And then the second book, this is another old family photo. Again, Roseanne is the cover star, but that's my mum. And I just thought it was such a beautiful image that I had to use these images because they were iconic. They're iconic, really. They're sort of legendary. They look professionally done, and I just think they capture the time, you know, the 60s, 70s time frame really well, where you would go on holiday and you would be allowed to hold a monkey, which I doubt very much you'd be able to do now. And then this picture is actually from June, is actually my daughter Sadie, just running through a grassy field in a fancy dress. And I really like the composition because it looks as if she's being chased by somebody, but they're not there, which is sort of really interesting. So she's running off, and you get the whole pace of the book when she's 7 years old. And June in the new book is 7. So that's kind of what she's like. She's growing into this very, very chatty, real little busybody, really interesting, really funny, curious character that questions everything. And she was a pleasure to write as well.
Fantastic, yeah, and I do really love the covers, and actually that I didn't realise that's what they were. So that kind of that's a little kind of nice little personal touch. The covers there, that's a lovely little addition to it. Now, with the second book, Jackie, it moves the focus from Frank from the first book to to his daughter, and it starts to she starts to kind of get to grip with life as a single mum, and while looking at the past of her mum a little bit, she discovers a little bit of a family secret, isn't there?
Yes, the second book is Jackie's sort of pathway. I think the books, as I said, are a kind of an exploration into grief, about the symbols and signs that we see, that we use to comfort ourselves when someone dies. So if a robin lands in your garden, you think you're having a little visit. If a white feather falls on your lap, you think it's some kind of significant sign. Or as happened to me recently, I went into a shop and I was on the phone to Fiona Nellis, who's my friend Gillian's sister, who died. And Fiona and I were talking, and when I walked into the shop to get the coffee, Lloyd Cole was playing, and anybody that knows myself and Gillian, I know Stephen knows, we were crazy about Lloyd Cole. Just Lloyd Cole, the Smiths, Jesus and Mary Chain, Sisters of Mercy, The Mission, all these bands we used to go and see. And Lloyd Cole was playing when I walked in the shop, and I couldn't believe it. And I held out the phone for Fiona and I said, "Can you hear that?" And she went, "Oh my God, it's Lloyd Cole. I can't believe it." And I was like, "She's listening to this call." And we started laughing. We could have got upset, but we started kind of laughing because it was a moment to sort of a coincidence to connect us and to make us feel better. Even though we had lost her, we still had those beautiful things about her that connect us to her. And so that's really sort of what the books examine as well, kind of. And then Jackie, it's 5 years on since her mum died in the second book. And she says in the book, people think it's 5 years on and you're supposed to be less sad. You're supposed to have gotten over it. You're supposed to be feeling better. And I still feel terrible. And I still miss my mum, really badly. And she's having these vivid dreams about her mum as well, which after Gillian died, I had loads of vivid dreams about her. And I just, writing the books was really cathartic in a way, because I was able to put a lot of those experiences into the book as, Jackie missing her mum. So the grief element of that, and also when I lost my mother-in-law, Bridget, a lot of that sort of hearing her voice, can still hear her voice in my head now in her thick Irish accent. And when after she died, Bridget, she left her house to my husband Gerard, her beloved son, and his sister, and he recently refurbished it. And I went round to have a look at the finished article, and I went upstairs and into her bedroom, and it was only me in the house. And I was standing in her bedroom and I was like, "So what do you think of it then?" And she immediately goes, "Well, I think it's absolutely beautiful. I love what you've done with the place." Right? And I started laughing, and I said, "It wasn't me, it was Gerard." And she went, "Well, that'll be a first," like that. It's just I love thinking. Now, whether it's true or not, whether she was really talking to me, it doesn't really matter. It could just be my imagination. It could be me conjuring up her voice. But if it brings me that little bit of ease and comfort, then I don't see any harm in believing in some of these coincidences. So I have that's the sole element of the books, and that all goes in, and that you see much more in the Jackie book, where she has dreams about her mum, and she feels like her mum is sending her a sign to investigate something. So she goes back to investigate this secret and finds, well, you have to read to find out what she finds.
And it's interesting you mentioned there about that kind of music connection thing that kind of brings people together a little bit. I'm thinking that there's a kind of Spotify list, the playlist that goes along with the new book that's coming out. Is that right?
Yeah. So every time, I mean, music. Anybody that knows me knows music's such a big part of my life, and so every time I write any book, there's music in it. There's a thread of music through it that represents the tastes of the characters. And it also sort of represents the eclectic mix of music that I was raised upon, raised with, when my mum and dad were crazy about everything from the Supremes to ELO to the Beatles to, you name it, they were listening to it. Even Billy Idol, my mum used to love. So everything goes in there. But it was kind of exciting for me to look at each character and say, well, what would he like, or what would she like, or what would be on the radio that Frank would enjoy? What would Jackie and Viv be enjoying at the shows? And I think it just brings that additional element to allow the reader, who I'm assuming is kind of roughly around the same age as me, to go, oh, yeah, right, okay, I now know what they're into. I now know that, you know, in Father Cleary in the new book, he's tapping along to Vanilla Ice, Ice Ice Baby, which just found really funny. He's like, I like that one. And so it's kind of, he's sort of really, really interesting. Frank singing along to, you know, Tom Jones, and Jackie's into Technotronic and the sort of early 90s stuff. And then the other character, Daniel, who has a thread in the story, quite a significant thread also in the third book. He's more into sort of indie stuff and the rise of indie. So it's great to be able to create an additional layer of colour to the writing, to go, oh, well, I hated that track, or I like that track, or, you know, you get an idea of somebody from their taste in music.
Yeah, and for anyone who was interested in catching the playlist, I've put the link to it in the chat as well, so they can kind of have a real look at that and listen to some of that as well if they want to at a later point. With the new book, June, there's two characters that could really be named after in the story. Obviously, there's the mum who died in the first book, and then there's the granddaughter June as well. Is it named after either one of them in particular at all?
No, they're both in it. So they're both, it's for both of them. I mean, although it is their title, which it had to be because it was the third generation, so it's Frank, Jackie, June, it is very much an ensemble book where it's 20,000 words more than Jackie, because I wanted to make sure that everybody had their pathway, you know, right down to Mrs. Morrison, right down to Viv. All the supporting characters all have their pathway, and no one has been missed out. Daniel, who's I especially enjoyed writing about Daniel and his relationship with his mum, and the very different relationship he's got with his dad, which typifies some of the dads of that time who were a bit out of touch with, you know, what was happening in the gay community. So his sort of, he gets an arc as well, really, really interesting. Yeah, it's an ensemble book, but the two Junes are definitely at the forefront of it.
Fantastic. And for any of the readers of the series so far, where can they expect this new book to take them? What kind of direction is it really going in?
Well, as David Quantick says, because he's read it, it's a heartwarming book full of wit and memorable writing, but with lots of unexpected twists and turns. So I think it's another look at life and soul. It's another look at a type of grief. As I said, Father Cleary has an illness, and you probably got an idea of what sort of illness he's going to have, because there was a lot of heavy hints of it in that chapter I just read. Losing somebody isn't always them dying. It can be another sort of loss and another sort of grief while they're still alive. So it's an examination of that. It's definitely an examination of life. There's a lot of nature versus nurture exploration in it, of where, you know, young June finds out that her dad, Tommy, spoiler alert, is in prison, and she begins to say, well, am I bad like, how much am I like him? Am I bad like him? And she kind of, because this age of 7 is where children develop their moral compass. They start to understand, well, that's right, that's wrong, that's good, that's bad. If I break the rules, these are the consequences. And they have a full understanding of it, that their brain is developed to that element. But it does make them constantly go, why, you know.
Yeah, I can testify that definitely happens having a 6-year-old myself. So yeah. But yeah, that's fantastic, and I'm just wondering if Ian Rankin will be happy or not to know that Tommy is in jail or not. So, I guess we'll maybe have to ask him and find out what his thoughts on that when he wants to do last week. Now, with that final part coming out tomorrow, where does that leave you from a writing point of view? Can we expect more books? Is there a new series? Is there any chance of more kind of life and soul characters being involved in any books coming in the future? What's your plans?
Well, the publisher came back and she was like, but wait, but what can they move to, and what happens to so and so, and can you tell me? And I'm not finished yet. So what I'm doing next, I'm doing a couple of things next year. Firstly, these 3 books will be transcribed and going on to Audible, so you'll be able to hear me telling the story. And then I'm also started writing a companion book to the series. I've taken one of the characters from June and put them into a new kind of environment. I don't know whether it's going to work or not. There will be back references to some of the other characters that they knew. It's a new point of view from me. I'm writing it in first person from they're telling the story, whereas usually I would write in multiple points of view, in third person. So it's a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a stretch, but I'm going to have to write it to find out whether it's going to work or not, and see where it goes. So it's a bit like if J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter and then she wrote whatever it was, the Twisted Tales of Dumbledore. I can't remember what because because you're a Harry Potter expert. She had some companion books.
Yeah, I can't actually. You put me on the spot. I can't actually think of what they're actually called, but yeah. I know what you mean. That, but yeah, I think that'll be really interesting. And it sounds very intriguing as well. What you're planning on doing with some of the one of the characters as well. So, at least a nice little mystery for the end of our event.
A lot of the time, I don't know. So when I'm writing, I have an idea for a character, and I'll start writing it thinking that they're going to take a particular path, and then they take over and they take another path, and I have to follow them on that path to see where they end up. Many times I start writing the book, I don't know what the ending is going to be, which is great, because then it becomes like an adventure for me as well, that you have to sort of write it out before you know how it's going to end.
Fantastic. Now we've kind of reached the end of the questions I have for you, Julie, but we've probably got a few minutes for the Sarah has come in with Tales of Beedle the Bard, so there you go. That's the one.
Thanks, Sarah.
So we'll probably get time for a few questions from some of the audience members as well. There's a few ways you can kind of do that. You can either use the chat function, or there's a Q&A function as well on here, or there's also a kind of wee raise hand thing. You can put that in if you want to kind of actually do that, and we can kind of switch on your mic and you can ask Julie directly. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Julie, and see what we have coming up? So I think we've got one getting typed at the moment, Julie, so we'll wait to see what the question is, and we'll see. But there's a fascinating little look that we've had there while we wait for questions to come in, that of the books, and I hope that everyone's enjoyed hearing a little bit more from you, Julie, with that. So it's been nice to kind of catch that as well. We'll just I'll just double check some of the parts to see if we've got any questions anywhere else. So I think it looks like we're kind of doing the chat function for it, and we'll just wait and see what the question is about whilst it's been typed.
Fantastic Beasts, that was it. Fantastic Beasts. Just remembered it.
So so Sarah has written, after delivering such an unexpected gut punch so early and frank, with June being dead, did you feel any pressure to duplicate that in your following books? So that's a very good question. So
do you mean delivering an early gut punch in the first chapter? Yeah, I like doing that. I like doing it at the beginning of it. I really, really like doing it. It's something that I've done in the first chapter of June as well, where someone said, you think you're reading a certain type of book in my book, so you think you kind of know, and then suddenly you're reading something very different. It's not what you think you're reading at all, in fact. And so there is, Father Cleary is that gut punch again, because I like to lead you, Sarah, up the alleyway of a nice comforting, oh, there's not much going on here. They're sitting down in the third book. The chapter opens where they're just Jean-Paul, Frank, Jackie and June are sitting down to dinner. There's an explanation of the dinner, and there's a catch-up chat over the dinner about what the other characters are doing, and Viv's got a new flat and she's moved in, with Terry and all this kind of stuff. They're now I won't spoil that for you, but it's a family chat around a meal where they're taking the mickey out of each other, and you begin the book lulled into their life again, into that house again, into the smells of that house, the size of the house, what it looks like, and what establish the different ages and relationships. And then you go to Father Cleary, who, boom, something, he's collapsed. What's going on there? And then that begins to unravel the rest of the book. So yeah, I mean, it's not really a writer's technique or anything like that I've learned. It's just something I like doing because I like the juxtaposition of that, nice, comforting, cozy house to then go, no, it isn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, and Frank, it definitely does grab you at the very start, because you kind of read it, and then when it becomes clear that the June isn't with Frank, she is dead. It was a kind of like, whoa moment, and they kind of realise this isn't the story I was expecting it to be at that point. So yeah, it was kind of a good kind of captivating way of dragging people in to kind of want to find out a little bit more about exactly what was going on, which is good. So, but does anyone get any other questions that they want to ask?
Sure, you can just raise your hand if you.
Yeah, if anyone wants, we can switch on the mics and things like that to allow anyone to ask a question as well if they want to do that.
Well, Stephen says even the places you don't name are very obvious when you read the books. It's like walking around with your mates. Yeah, it's exactly what it was.
Stephen also has just wrote saying there's no questions. He just thinks that your writing is magic. So that's a nice little comment there from Stephen. I think if there's no other questions for you, I'd just like to thank you, Julie, for coming. Although Claire's now typing as well, so we'll give Claire a little bit of time to type her response as well. Just thank you, Julie, for coming along and chatting to us for this online event. I'm sure the audience have enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed talking to you about it. And also thank you guys for coming along as well, because there is no event without an audience, let's face it. So it's much appreciated that you guys come along and chat take part in the event with us and leave some nice comments and questions and things like that for Julie to answer to as well. If you haven't already done so, although I get the impression that some of you already know Julie, so you may already be following her on various social medias, but if you haven't already been following her on social media, she is the best way probably to keep track of what's happening next with Julie and find out more about that intriguing story that might be coming in the future. She is on social media on X, which was formerly Twitter. I don't think anyone will quit used to calling it X just quick, so that's anytime soon, but it's what Elon wants. And so you can find them at Julie Hamill on there, and also on Instagram at Julie Hamill Official as well. I don't know, is there any other social medias accounts that you want to kind of make sure that you can get out there as well? That's the two main ones I could think of whenever I was looking at it.
Anything that's going on with me you can find on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, definitely. I've also got a link tree, linktr.ee/Julie Hamill, that gives a list of upcoming events that I'm doing. Tomorrow I'm doing a radio show. Tomorrow afternoon I'll be interviewed by the Camden New Journal. Thursday I'm doing a book launch party at the Dublin Castle in London, which will be a live Q&A and reading and with music, with a bit of a disco and a signing. And then Sunday I'll be back on Times Radio in the afternoon talking about the books as well. But I would just like to thank you, Chris. I thought your questions were fantastic and you're a really excellent host, and really thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And if anyone is kind of local to North Lanarkshire, the 3 books are available in our libraries as well. You can reserve any 3 of them to collect if you want. And if not, if you're not kind of local to North Lanarkshire, the books are available to purchase on places such as Amazon, and I'm sure your local library would also have them as well. So if you want to check them out there too. But thank you very much, guys, for coming along. It's been a fantastic afternoon. Hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have. And once again, Julie, thank you for coming along and chatting to us. It's been fantastic. So thank you very much.
Everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Hildy just said, and if it's not available, go and request them in the library. So there you go. So get the books out there for in the library world to get Julie's books and stories out there a little bit further, and get Airdrie on the tourist map. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you,
Bye,
Chris.
guys.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.